Hello. As Mary said, my name is Peter Moon, and I'm a writer and publisher from Long Island, New York. And I'm mostly known for the Montauk Project Experiments in Time, which is a story from Preston Nichols, who I ghost wrote this book with him and for him. Do you need something?
I'll move this way.
All right.
Give you a little more room.
Okay, so are we totally handled with you guys?
I'm done.
Okay. Okay, so anyway, Preston Nichols had a lot of strange experiments. He's an incredible scientist, and I helped him write this book about these series of experiments that took place in Montauk, New York, at the eastern end of Long Island. Now, there's a very strong connection between Montauk, New York, and Wisconsin, because as it turned out, with all of my research into the Montauk Project and trying to verify it, I was led through a series of coincidences or synchronicity. And synchronicity means time together. Sync is, together, sync, and chronos is time. So it means when things begin to occur outside of the ordinary, you have what's called a meaningful coincidence. Because a lot of people in here could be named Don. That's not so odd to have like 2-3 people in the room named Don. If we had 3 people named Ezekiel, that would be, a much greater oddity. That means a meaningful coincidence is acting, a force is acting on the outside. And we're going to talk a little bit about the force acting on the outside, or in the case of the hollow earth, force acting from the inside. But it's an exterior force to the normal stream of events when it occurs outside the law of probability. All of these synchronicities actually led me to Transylvania, and I'm going to be touching upon that through time travel. But the synchronicities with Montauk, all of these coincidences led me to discover that the place where they held these experiments in Montauk, New York, at Camp Hero, was sacred Native American ground. And the Montauk Indians were the rightful owners of that land, but they had been displaced from the 1600s and so on, to where they were finally declared extinct in 1909. And when they were declared extinct, they were already on the run. And in I think it was the 1800s, there was a Montauk Indian matriarch, or Queen of the Montauks, Mary Fowler, and she married Samson Occam. And Samson Occam was a Mohegan. He was a preacher. He started the Moores Charity School in Connecticut, which eventually became Dartmouth University. And that's where Joseph Smith went to school with his brother, the Mormon. And when Samson Occam, he migrated his people before Joseph Smith to Wisconsin. And so you have Montauk Indians in Wisconsin. And it's kind of an odd connection. Why did they come to Wisconsin? We don't really know why they came, other than displacement from Brotherton, New York, which was upstate New York. They were looking for a home. But there must have been some ancient connections here. We know there's an underground in this city, Burlington, Wisconsin. There's all sorts of Masonic symbols, which, if you haven't seen Mary's tour of this area, it's fascinating to watch all the Masonic stuff, which ends up with, Lincoln down the street. That's something you guys should do if you get a chance. It's great. So anyway, the ancient people, like we've taken excursions a year and a half ago with Frank. He went and explained the mounds out there where we're going tonight, to the haunted woods, those of us who are going. Those are old Indian mounds. So there's a very strong connection with, the Indians have a very strong connection to the ancient ones. Now, because I deal in coincidence, and because some of you people are familiar with my story, and I'm going to say a very interesting thing that leads us to not only Transylvania, but to the area where Rick and Dennis come from. There's a lot of synchronicity between my work and Rick and Dennis's that hasn't really come to full fruition yet. and we're still all discovering it. Now, there's another interesting character who came into my life, which is the one who, you know, financed my first trip to Transylvania. And he's a time scientist, Dr. David Anderson, and you can look up his stuff on andersoninstitute.com. He's the most advanced time travel scientist in the world. And he saw this book that I published, the Montauk Project, Experiments in Time. And David Anderson, you know, came to one of the local meetings we had in Long Island, which he was living and had a lab there at the time. And he befriended me. And we've been friends for like 12 years now, or 11 years. And he had very advanced stuff in time where he could slow and speed up time. And this had great medical applications in the medical world and whatnot. But I'm not going to focus on my history with David Anderson, which I've talked about here before in years past. But David went out of commission for several years. He reappeared. He reinvited me to Romania, or invited me to Romania in 2008. I went in 2008, 2009, and 2010, this year. Now, and I've reestablished my connection to him because he was on such cutting-edge technology that he had to go underground for safety and security reasons and whatnot. And he created a big ruckus when he came out in public a year ago, 2009, on New Year's Eve or the day before. I co-hosted a radio show where we interviewed him, his first public radio interview. This was followed up by Art Bell on Coast to Coast on, I think it was January 30th, and you can still hear that on YouTube, where he talks about that Art Bell says, have you put people in the time chamber? And he says the short answer is yes. So he's experimenting with people in the time chamber. Before it was just organs or plants and whatnot. But anyway, David, I was doing a seminar at Montauk in April with a group called Sacred Spirit Tours. And they're going to have a conference called the Pythagorean Conference in Louisville, Kentucky, this time next year. I mean, it'll be a week after this. It won't conflict with this event, as far as I know. So David's planning to appear there. I'm planning to appear there. I hope to get Rick and Dennis there. And there's a lot of exopolitics people that are going to be there. But anyway, that event kind of grew out of the girl, Sacred Spirit Tours, Sandy Sabatini. She had received a mysterious letter from David Anderson in the 1990s from the Time Travel Research Center. She doesn't even know why she got it. And she received it. She forgot about it till she met me through a series of synchronicities. And then we go to having this tour, which was it was sort of a tour, but the purpose of the tour for me was to bring back, I mean, they're Sacred Spirit Tours. You know, we go to this sacred site, Montauk. But I wanted to bring the medicine band back to Montauk because I was befriended by the Montauk Indians, the shaman of the Indians. It took her 15 years to introduce me to the medicine man, Artie Crippen. And he's talked about in my book, Montauk Book of the Living. And he's the one who introduced me to Qigong and my Taoist teacher, Roosevelt Gainey, and who I study with. And the medicine man is very happy that I'm studying with somebody who's much more proficient in Qigong than he is. And you got to understand, Artie grew up with knowing Bruce Lee as Uncle Lee, so he's very proficient himself in the martial arts. But anyway, so we go to this event we had in April, and sure enough, Artie came to the event in April at Montauk that was held at Montauk, and we had, I guess, about 20 people there. And at the last minute, a few weeks before the event, I got an email from David Anderson saying, I'd like to have a face-to-face meeting with you in the near future. Well, what do you think? And I said, well, why don't you come out to Montauk? Well, we're having an event. You can come. You know, you can be a guest. And he wrote back and said, is it all right if I make a presentation? I said, by all means. So what he told me is that he was going to make a presentation of his time chamber. He was going to show it on video. And he's waiting to release a video. And the video has been held up because he needs permissions from his partners. And when you say partners, well, there's a whole story about who his partners may or may not be, but they obviously include governments and factions of the government there's factions of the government that want time technology or time control technology to come forward. There's others that want to restrict it because it's a whole battle of technical wars. You know, technical, as Stanton was talking this morning about human beings are always fighting. And it's war technology. Well, I would go a step further and say there's forces that are influencing human beings to fight. There are human beings that are small-minded, but their minds are basically not fully activated. And this is why the Qigong's important, because if you activate all of your lung capacity, most humans are using 5%. If you start using 100% of your lungs, you start using more of your brain capacity. So this is one of the reasons why it's very important. But you know, when you talk about the Shaolin monastery, which contains the Taoist temple, sometimes called the Shaolin Temple, which is really not correct, is you have a sacred, as we saw the Shangri-La, this is the center, you know, the ancient Chinese tradition of the center of the earth, or, you know, the inner earth. And so anyway, when we talk about, well, so it's a technology of war. He says time is, all these governments are fighting about war. You know, they want to learn time control technology for war purposes because it's very powerful. And I'm not going to digress. Maybe I can go into that a little bit more tomorrow morning. But I'm going to stick to this story and take us into the center of the earth, so to speak, as much as I can and follow with the continuation of what we've already been learning the last 2 days from Dennis and Rick. Specifically, because I heard both of those lectures. And so David showed up, and he says, there's no reason I can't show that, you know, the people I need permission, there's no reason I can't show it to a group of 20 people. They didn't say I can't show it to a group of 20 people informally and see how they react to it, so that's what he did. And he came. He drove all the way from Rochester, which is a long drive, Rochester to Montauk. That's like going from the top of New York State in the west to the bottom in the east. And he gave his talk, which was a rehash of stuff I had heard in Romania the summer before. And I'm not going to digress into that talk because it's very interesting, but I'm going to a certain point here. Just to suffice it to say that he has made great breakthroughs in time. He can substantiate it with certain physics things and show you some of the things you will not understand because they are more, we're waiting to hear more about those as well. He hasn't even come forth with the more tertiary stage of what he's done. So what he showed us was a video of his time chamber which showed an amaryllis plant which would take 4 days to bloom. He showed it happening in 3 minutes. And you could tell that it wasn't what you call time lapse because of the saturation. And there was a professional photographer in the audience who said that's the saturation would not allow for that in time lapse. I didn't really question him anyway. So it was, you know, that was kind of the highlight for me because I'd heard most of the other stuff. He'd streamlined the presentation much better for everybody else who hadn't heard it. So then something very strange happened, and I'm trying to think how it happened. Okay, I come home, and it must have been the next day or two. I have an email. And I'm CC'd on an email between a lady named Eve Longren. She wrote a book called Alien Love Bite, or Love Bite. It's about getting bit by aliens. And you have a, you know, it's not a pleasant experience, I can tell you. Anyway, with another friend of mine, Tantra Bensko. She was the first one I went to Romania with. And Tantra's a Tantra teacher, but she's a very advanced soul in a lot of ways, and they're talking about something called Transylvania Colony. And I said, what the hell is this? And there's a whole another aspect to Transylvania. There's a Transylvania County in North Carolina. And as I read about Transylvania Colony, it was supposed to be the 14th colony of the United States. It was designed to be 14th colony, and it was put together, and all the investors in it were George Washington, Ben Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, you know, all these top as they said in the Raiders of the Lost Ark movie, top men who were investing in Transylvania colony. And it was and of course they hired Daniel Boone to cut down the trees and settle the colony. And it's in most of what is the state of Kentucky today. And there's a Transylvania University in Kentucky to this day, and all sorts of place names concerning it. The county is in North Carolina. So I said, this is very interesting. Transylvania colony, Kentucky. I said, this would be really interesting if this Transylvania colony just happens to be in the Kentucky part of where the Kentucky Blue Bloods come from. Now, Mary has done a whole investigation down in Kentucky of the Blue people. And she's got a big head of an ancient, what's the guy's head that she has? The Serpent King. You can see a picture of her on her website with the Serpent King.
Right, I can't remember.
This is a Caucasian pre-Columbian statue in Kentucky that Mary has gone down there and investigated. So it's a fascinating story. So I called, Mary to find out, what was what. I said, is this, and sure enough, the Blue people in Kentucky come right from Transylvania colony. They're in the heart, the Blue people of Kentucky. I've written a lot about the Rh-negative blue race, which ostensibly comes from Mars, the inner Earth of Mars. And that's a whole nother lecture and a whole nother story. But Rh-negative means you have no monkey blood, you have no rhesus factor. So it comes from off planet. They don't know where it comes from. But anyway, the Kentucky Blue Bloods, there was a posting on the internet which said there was, I think the guy's name was Blue Otter. And Blue Otter said that the Blue people of Kentucky, they have skin discoloration. There's a whole lot of skin discoloration with blue. And this is, you get your blue blood. This is where sacre bleu, the French term sacre bleu, sacred blue. These are the sacred, or the ancient race. And I know certain authors have tried to say they're all shape-shifting reptilians and whatnot, and that's not accurate, okay? Now, I wouldn't take away anybody's ability to shapeshift. I wouldn't begrudge them that. And of course, the great Manitou was the Indian spirit, the shapeshifter. It was a sacred thing in the native tradition. They turn it into a diabolical thing in certain other traditions. So so anyway, I'm looking at this whole, what's this picture? What's the connection between Transylvania and Kentucky and Transylvania in Romania, where I've been going? In fact, I had just taken a trip the second year to the sacred spot of Transylvania, which is called Sarmisegetusa, and it's an astro calendar. And I was hoping to show some pictures. Maybe we can show some pictures. I have a DVD of it, and because I work on a Mac, it didn't seem to work on these computers. So Rick said he could get it working out there. Maybe we can show it tomorrow or something out in some of the pictures of the Romanian Sphinx, which is here, the Romanian Sphinx, and Sarmisegetusa, which is in a different place. This is not in Transylvania. This is outside of Transylvania, just outside in the Bucegi Mountains. The Sarmisegetusa with the astro calendar, the sacred spot, is in the middle of Transylvania, and it's a spiritual, what do you call it, quest, journey that I took with a couple of Romanian girls who, one of them was nice enough to be my tour guide, very advanced soul. And we stayed at a monastery there with the bishop of the Old Orthodox Church, as opposed to New Orthodox. Old Orthodox is very pure. New Orthodox, they drive Mercedes and stuff. Old Orthodox wants to feed the poor, help the sick, and he's an exorcist. So I got few Westerners get to go to Transylvania, let alone stay with an exorcist. And he was a very advanced soul in many respects. But he sees everything through the lens of the church. But he was able to understand when he's talking about a war of demons and angels, and I tell him how electronics play into that from a different perspective, with Montauk and whatnot. it was a little more than he was used to dealing with on many levels, but he was very happy and he was very nice, and he took very good care of us. Now, so anyway, I was trying to connect the dots between Transylvania and Kentucky. So I called up Sandy, and I see Sandy's from Kentucky. And I said, Sandy, I said, do you know about this stuff? And she says, no, I had no idea about these blue people in Kentucky. And she says, you know, that's right where I live. That's where my father. In fact, we have property there, and there was she was telling me that there were people coming in and taking artifacts off the property in a cave, you know, pseudo-archaeologists. So she was like, it was happening right there. There's a lot of archaeology down there in Kentucky. So she was kind of fascinated that now all of a sudden we're having a conference down there, the Pythagorean conference. And as I explained to her, I said, you shouldn't call it the Pythagorean conference. Of course, Pythagoras is this incredible character with geometry. He's just an incredible character. But in Transylvania, this Ariasarma Segetusa is the god is Zalmoxes. Now, most of you have probably never heard of Zalmoxes, but Zalmoxes is in history. Herodotus wrote that he's the disciple of Pythagoras who becomes a god. Zalmoxes means the leaping god. Zal is to leap, or it means the root of zealous. To transform. Leap can be transforming, you know, to make a quantum leap. Moxes, for the Yiddish expression moxie, but moxes, if you take that X and transliterate it into an S, it's Moses. And Zalmoxes, according to the Romanian tradition, taught Moses. I mean, taught the Egyptians. He didn't teach Moses, he was Moses. He taught the Egyptians. I'm saying he was Moses. But see, the first town I went to in Transylvania is called Sinaia. I learned it's named after Sinai. Or maybe Sinai is named after Sinaia. Okay? That's where I stayed to go to the Sphinx. So what came first? Moses and Zalmoxes and Sinaia? Or Moses, Moshe, and Sinai? Now, Zalmoxes, if he taught the Egyptians, would have to come far earlier than Pythagoras, who was 400 or 500 BC. So this began to extend my horizons of looking at the world. Now, when we go to this, what's the connection between Transylvania and Kentucky and Romania? You start searching. You just do words on the internet. You plug in things, and finally what I came up with was a very interesting character, Saint Germain. Okay, Saint Germain's from Transylvania, all right?
One incarnation, right?
Yeah, well, as the famous incarnation. Yeah. I think you say it, Racosni family. And he took the name Saint Germain when he went to Italy, and he stayed in the town of Germain, okay? And he took on the name Saint Germain from the town. That's where he studied in a monastery, I believe. I don't know which denomination. And so there are records of the Saint Germain and this character who lived for a long time, and he was during the French Revolution, but he was also in America. And this is what connects him to Kentucky, because there's a mysterious character in Manly P. Hall's book, I think it's called Secret Destiny of America. And he talks about Saint Germain being at the Declaration of Independence and instigating the whole Revolutionary War. And he's referred to as a mysterious character who isn't like given prime time coverage. He's a mysterious character. And he also was in France. He knew Ben Franklin. He knew all these people. So it would stand to reason, now this is speculative and it's a hypothesis, but it would stand to reason that if he's backing this colony, whereas there's a strong incidence of Rh negative blood from Romania, it would stand to reason that he's going to name this colony, he's going to finance it and get the Rh negative people of Kentucky and make it this mysterious 14th colony, which never happened, because King George III overruled it. And he overruled it because he had made an edict, actually years earlier, that said colonists are not to transact anything with natives. This all has to be done through the crown. Okay? So the proposal for the 14th colony, and there was actually land purchased from the Indians. It was all invalidated because of King George III edict. What is King George III famous for? You know what he's famous for? Blue Bloods disease. There's a whole case study, the most famous case of blue bloods, where he pissed purple. It's porphyria. You know, and porphyria, there's many different types of porphyria. And it relates to, you know, skin problems, stuff that can be easily identified with perhaps vampirism or werewolfism. Okay? It's related. And there's many different types of porphyria. But it's called the blue bloods disease because that's where it happened. And King George was related to the person who first had it in recorded history was Mary Queen of Scots. And her ancestry comes from Transylvania. Okay? So these are very interesting synchronicities or coincidences. And this is, so I said, wow, this is a connection. So I then, this last summer, it inspired me. And after I met with David, he said, the reason he wanted to meet with me, he says, what do you want to do in Romania this summer? Meaning the kids camp Atlanticron, which means Time of Atlantis, where there's a camp he goes to and helps fund every summer, the first week of August or thereabouts, and kids from the ages of 16 to 30 participate in science. He was teaching them time travel one year. Sometimes he doesn't even teach. You know, they have Tesla coils there sometimes, artistic projects, mandalas. And I had lectured with David and without David, even talked about this book, Transylvania Sunrise, which I really haven't mentioned. But anyway, and I'm going to get to the book 2. I'm going to be talking about, we'll see how much time we have, because it seems like I'm about halfway through this talk. Okay, where do I go to? 7:30, do you know?
Yes.
Okay, so I've hopefully we can touch on this. But, so anyway, now the one, earlier, I'm going to go back to Blue Otter. He mentioned that these blue blood people lived in the inner earth. They think that the Indians wiped them out, the blue blood people. Now there are still remnants of blue people, but they went down under the earth and retreated to where their home town was. And I would highly recommend the University of Kentucky or any of the ball teams that play down there change their name to the Blues or something like that. You know, make it a little more ethnically appropriate. That's a joke.
Did they go to caves or structures?
Caves. But they would maybe access structures through the caves. I don't know. There's a lot of karstic caves that go under Kentucky. Kentucky's very famous for its caves. And in fact, yes, Aleister Crowley, when he was in the United States, went there to visit the caves.
Also, one of the researchers that I deal with, somebody people might have heard of him as Branson or Bruce.
Right.
Branson. He traced Edidorfa, the story of Edidorfa. It's supposed to be James Morgan, the Mormon that disappeared. It's supposed to be the story of him going down.
You mean not? He wasn't a Mormon. He was an anti-Mason.
Anti-Mormon, I'm sorry.
An anti-Mason.
Anti-Mason.
And he got and he got caught up. Okay, that's another synchronicity with our work.
But anyway, Bruce traced the story of Edidorfa, where the cave is, and then he found it in Kentucky. We've actually got a map of it.
Okay, this is something we're going to have to follow up. I'm very interested in that, but that's kind of off topic, but it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Because Joseph Smith grew up in, you know, who left his legacy here with John Stranga, James Stranga, who lived right down the street here, where the real Mormons came. Joseph Smith's family came here, and then Brigham Young was a Mason who took over everybody. But Joseph Smith, throughout his whole life, was surrounded by Montauk Indians at one point, and then he got in this big fight between the Masons and the anti-Masons, and he was right in the middle of it and was eventually killed by the Masons. But anyway, that's a different topic. But I was just mentioning, so David said to me, what do you want to do at Atlanticron this year? I said, well, I talk over people's heads. I'm getting tired of it. I talk, and, you know, it requires too much indoctrination, orientation, so they even understand what I'm talking about. Now, I'm pretty comfortable talking to you new people that haven't heard of me. You getting what I'm saying, I think, right? Okay, but it can kind of get like, the more I write, I've written like, I published 16 books, I've written about 11, and it's like, I could be explaining myself for the rest of my life, even though I've written books, because people read, they forget, you know, and you have to continually summarize. So anyway, I seem to be moving astrologically and other ways more into cinema, and on many different levels. So anyway, I said to David, I said, well, last year I was there, and these two kids wanted some help with a script they were writing, and I helped them. They asked me to be in the movie, which I didn't want to be in it, but I said, sure, I'll do it for you. They gave me this Darth Vader cape. I was the good one in the movie, actually. And it was an island of mind-controlled people. And we started shooting the movie. I was working with Roberto Quaglia, a cinematographer from Italy, and we got along really well. So somebody decided that they didn't like Roberto from some incident 3 years ago or something, and it was his cape, and he says, I want the cape back. He ruined the kid's film. You know, this guy's an adult. This is for the kids we're doing it. We're not, you know, we're not doing this to stroke our own egos. So I said, you know, what a jerk. So I said, I told David about the experience, and I said, why don't we do a film? David loved the idea. So I called it the Atlantic Run Film Company, and the board approved it. They were very excited about it. And I wrote a script based upon this theme I just told you about, the Transylvania. It was called My Kentucky Cousin. And it's about a guy, there's a kid there who looks like Rasputin. So I said, I'm going to make Rasputin's genetics. We actually had to replace him because he couldn't do the role. But it was Rasputin going to Transylvania, a bastard grandson of Rasputin, and finding his roots. And he's met with the 23. They put the 23 on his palm. You know, the 23 is the mysterious number that Robert Anton Wilson talked about, this mystery number. And even Dan Aykroyd, not Dan Aykroyd, what's his name? Jim Carrey, the comedian. He goes, I think he's got, you know, he made a movie, 23, and it's all this occult significance, and he doesn't even know what he's talking about. He has no idea what he's talking about. 23 refers to the fact that the human DNA has 23 gene pairs, okay?
Michael Jordan only knew.
Good point. Didn't he have a second number? Michael Jordan, 40?
45.
Okay. Pardon?
And then he got 23 back.
That's right. I could tell you a story about 4 or 5, but anyway, 23 is, this whole 23 is based upon, and you'll even see allusions to it in Ulysses, the play, or you know, Odysseus. What's that called? The Odyssey, because he has a whole incident with Circe, but where there's 22 men, and the 23rd man is the only one that doesn't get polluted or whatever by Circe, that doesn't turn into a pig or something like this. He goes back and tells Ulysses, because humans have pig blood, you know? And so anyway, the 23 represents the 23rd gene pair. Now, there's a lot of theory, and a lot of it can be backed up, that human beings once had 24 gene pairs, and they collapsed, okay? They're very complicated. The thesis in this story was that when those gene pairs uncollapse, you have a being that can do incredible things, like shapeshift into an elf or a vampire. And the movie was about vampires and elves having a war, you know, or a fight over, and there was time travel technology involved in it. You know, I used some of the themes from David's work, and it was a very challenging 10 days. I was on full time trying to get this movie done, and I guess we've got somebody trying to finish it up now in the special effects. It was a campy movie. It was meant to be fun and sort of tell this metaphysical story. So that's what I ended up doing at Atlanticron. And David didn't go last year because David was under threat of, let me put it this way. The first thing I got there is the director of the camp says, see those people over there under a tent? I said, yeah. He says, those are Navy SEALs. So we'd never had Navy SEALs there before. We had the Coast Guard there, and David did not show up. And that was unfortunate, but I knew that would happen. And he was also hoping, and this did not have either, hoping to meet me in Bulgaria, which I went to for 10 days and stayed with my publisher there in Bulgaria, and I had a wonderful tour. And as I said to him there, there's many entrances to the inner earth there. There's tons of entrances to the inner earth all over the world. Tons of inner earth places. The problem is no access. So, I said, we don't need another inner earth gateway. We need access to the gateway. And that's what this book is about. Transylvania Sunrise. There is a Sphinx in Romania. It is ancient. From this aspect, it looks like it's sculpted. From other aspects, it looks like it's wind-hewn, wind-blown. And people like to have pissing fights over it. But not too many, because most people don't even know about it. It's the biggest tourist attraction in Romania. Dracula's castle is really not Dracula's castle. It's some place where he might have stayed for a week or two. There's not even a castle Dracula. There's a fortress that he had way up in a mountain. That's where he really hung out for a certain amount of times. And Dracula is from Wallachia, not Transylvania. He was born in Transylvania while his father was interred at a castle under house arrest. So there's a lot of misconceptions. And I also made a mistake in the script. I had a bit role for Dracula. A bit role. I could have chosen any dark character, and I had all these people dropping out of the thing, a girl stepping on a thorn, getting her foot bloody. One actress having the makeup, hypoallergenic makeup giving her allergies. And we had all sorts of problems. And one girl lost her voice. I said, and then I found out in any theatrical production of Macbeth or Dracula, people fall off like flies. There's incidents. So my advice to any of you is don't use Macbeth or Dracula in a role. Avoid it. Have some other character. So I learned this the hard way. Even to the point where one of the ladies there said, make a movie about why you can't make the movie. But somehow it should be produced, and hopefully we can put it up on YouTube. So anyway, Transylvania Sunrise. This is a story that came to me from my Romanian publisher. And I didn't quite have the story right. There's a guy in Romania named Sorin Hormuz, and he worked at a publishing house. And he was given the Montauk Project, and they taken to his boss and said, do you want to publish this? The boss said no. He says, well, I want to publish this. So he created his own publishing house in Romania called Daksha Publishing. And he published the Montauk Project. Now, in Romanian, which I might have got a gross sum of maybe $200 for. The economy's not the same as ours.
Never translated?
Pardon?
Was it ever translated?
It was translated into Romanian, yeah. It's been circulated in Romania for years.
Is it in English?
The Montauk Project. I know, it's my book, the Montauk Project. The first book I did was translated into Romanian, and most of the books have been translated into Romanian that I wrote. But, so anyway, I went, so anyway, after the book was published, Radu Chinamar is how you would say it, he apparently read the book, and he wrote, emailed, contacted, sent he says, how would you like to publish this book? I'm holding in my hand. And fascinating. This book is written by Radu, and he tells the story. He meets this Romanian psychic who works for the secret occult department of Romanian intelligence. It's called Department Zero, or Zero Department. His name in the book is Cezar or Cesar Brad. We would say Caesar, they would say Cezar Brad. And Cezar is born with a huge, long umbilical cord. The doctors report this strange thing to the authorities, which is communist at the time, and they monitor the kid, which they're supposed to for their X-Files department or Department Zero. And into the scene comes a mysterious Chinese doctor from Red China named Dr. Zen, X-I-E-N. And Dr. Zen becomes his tutor as this kid grows up. And they tutor this kid, Cezar, to become the head of Department Zero. So he's the head of Department Zero when he meets the author of this book, Radu. And Radu says, so he says, you know, he demonstrates some of his psychic abilities, and he says, I've picked you, I need you to write a story for me. And he begins to tell him about this mysterious chamber that was discovered in the Bucegi Mountains underneath this Sphinx. And underneath this Sphinx is next to the Sphinx is a stone, a bunch of stones that are called Babel, or Babil, which means old women in Romanian. Baba or Babil, Babylon means gateway. So this is symbolic of a gateway. Another thing I should tell you about rocks in this part of the world, Bulgaria and Romania, they look like as if they were hewn by an ancient artist who wanted to make you wonder whether, is this a face, is this a rock, is this a face, is this a rock, is this a mermaid, is this a rock? And this is the way they sculpted in coherence with nature. And there's many instances of this, particularly in Bulgaria, but which was all one place at one time. Now, so Cezar has this this chamber, and the way he finds out about this chamber is he says, there was an Italian Freemason by the name of Mazzini, Signor Mazzini. They call him the Venerable One. He's like one of the highest Italian Freemasons that there are. And he knows about Cezar and Department Zero, which fascinates Cezar because he says, people don't, not even my own government knows about me. He says, only the president and the head of security. And the president of security is always trying to torpedo Department Zero because he's not in control of it. This guy answers directly to a general who answers to the president. And he says, how does this Italian Freemason know about me? And the Italian Freemason says, look, through the Pentagon's ground penetrating radar, we've discovered a chamber underneath the Sphinx. We can't get at it. We want to know what's in it. We need your help. We will offer you all sorts of, things. You can become one of us and you'll get everything your heart desired. And Cezar, who's very ethical, realizes this guy is dangerous, but he has to go along with him because if he doesn't, he'll get what he wants anyway. So they open up this chamber with the help of the Americans. It requires high-powered atomic technology to do it. And after a long try, they open it up, but the shit hits the fan literally because when they get into this room, it ignites an alarm where there's a similar structure in Iraq near Baghdad where the Americans have already penetrated. So they know about it. And they see a holographic projection come up that says what's going on in Romania. They can see it. They don't have to be told it. And they then report it up lines, and it gets to President Bush, who says, what's going on? He contacts the Romanian president, and the Romanian president says, what's going on? Investigates, and the general has to go, and Cezar have to go to the president of Romania, who is now not a communist country, and they explain what happened. And the president says, you did the right thing. You did the only thing you could do. And intense negotiation goes on between the Americans and the Romanians because there's a lot of diplomatic issues. Out of this comes Romanians becoming a part of NATO, and you'll see this all in the papers. It's Romanian, there's unprecedented diplomatic connections between Romania and America to this day. And it all seems based upon this and the secret chamber, and in the background is lurking David Anderson, my friend. And then when I was in his apartment one time in Long Island, I was like, he said, you're the second person to be here. And we were talking about Christmas cards. He said, I got some Christmas cards. He shows me his Christmas cards. They're all from world leaders, addressed to the Time Travel Research Center. And, you know, it's a very interesting, he reminds me of the story of Stranger in the Pentagon, you know, Val Thor. It's like, he's like, what, you know, who is this guy, you know? He might be talking to some world leader one minute, and then he's talking to me informally, like a buddy, you know? It's funny. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like, it's, you know, it's a very interesting friend. But he's not the type of friend you call up any old time and get a hold of either. So, anyway, and actually, he asked me to invite Stanton to Romania next year. So I extended that, and they're going to talk and see if we can get Stanton over there. So, and make, you know, because Stanton's a nuclear physicist, and you know what I mean, get more understanding of this into the more mainstream UFO channels. But anyway, so anyway, I'm going to touch on where this, you know, where this goes. So anyway, when Cesar says, Radu, you can come in now, and he actually allows him to come into this chamber, and the Freemason is thrown out when there's this big fight with all the diplomacy. He has to run for cover because he can't get caught in the middle of all this, or he will be exposed for who he is. And the Romanians are not like the Americans in their government. I mean, they have plenty of repression and corruption and whatnot, just as any government, but there's a much stronger advocacy to tell the truth in Romania than there is in America. So anyway, the long and short of this is Radu gets into this, and he sees in this chamber technology that gives out holographic projections. So you can put your hand over a table like this, it'll read out your DNA. If you put it closer, it'll give you a more microscopic reading of your DNA, your hand, what it looks like. If you go to another table, it'll show you an alien species, okay? And it'll show you the star system to show where the planet is that the alien comes from. If you put two hands over, either a human or this one or another, two alien, it'll mix the species and show what's if they combine. Now, if this is not true, it's very creative science fiction. You know, very creative. So then we go, now this technology was put there like 50,000 years ago at least. It's old Atlantean technology. And this is why, by coincidence, or is it coincidences, that I go to this conference called Atlanticron, which means Time of Atlantis in Romania. This is where David brings me. And David will often, you know, smile because he doesn't know the answers to things. Sometimes he does know the answers to things and he can't say them because there's all sorts of security classifications which go beyond government classifications. As one of his friends once said to me, he has higher security clearance than the president. You know, which I guess a lot of people have that. So anyway, this story ends with him, with Radu, going into the chamber. Much of it is around the political intrigue swirling around the whole event. And he goes into the chamber and, you know, does this stuff. And then he sees a history of the world. And he says, everybody who sees this history of the world is going to see one that resonates with himself. It's going to be tailored to the individual who's watching it. It's going to have some form of biofeedback. And David right now is studying biometrics, you know, the measurement of, you know, looking at an eye, and it'll you know, scan your retina and let you in. So there's a lot of synergy between that technology and what David's kind of doing with his technology. So anyway, in the tunnel, in the chamber, there are 3 tunnels. It says at the end of this book, and one tunnel goes to a similar structure underneath the Sphinx in Egypt, underneath the Sphinx and the Pyramid at Giza. This is way down under. Now, there are other chambers. There are chambers below what they say there are, and they deny these. They were selling videos on the Art Bell show of an expedition in 1996 a friend of mine was on, and they say there's nothing below the Sphinx, but they've been on video. So they lie. Now, these chambers would be well below that because you have civilization built upon civilization built upon civilization. So anyway, underneath that is supposedly another chamber with a time travel device that is in the third book. This is book 1. I haven't even read book 3. I've read, I think, three-quarters of book 2. The fourth one is waiting for me when I get home, the fourth chapter or fourth section of the second book, which is going to be called, they didn't call it this in Romanian. They had the name The Enemy Within, which didn't quite work in America. It's not a very attractive title. So I called it Transylvania Sunrise, being that when the sunrise comes up, the vampire goes away. And the next one's going to be called Transylvania Moonrise, because that has a lot to do with the goddess, okay? And from the inner earth, again. But so the second tunnel, one goes to Egypt, another tunnel goes to Tibet. But when it goes to Tibet, it has an offshoot to Baghdad with a similar structure in Baghdad, similar structure but it's not as big. None of these are as big as the one in Romania, except maybe Egypt. Romania seems to be the master one. Then one goes to Tibet, and then there's an offshoot with another one that goes to Mongolia. So, and there's a third tunnel which goes into the inner earth, which gets us back to the inner earth. Now, I would get sporadic correspondence from Radu after I published this book, which he was very happy with. There's one mistake in it at the end, where it's talking about, I think it's like, I misidentify something as the U.S. Antarctic Association. It's wrong. It has nothing to do with the Antarctic. But he says to me, he said he was very happy with the book, that there was a lot of pressure put on him to stop writing. He wrote 4 books in total. But he said that his mentor, Cesar, is no longer with him. He went to go be an ambassador to the beings in the inner earth. Now, what the hell does that mean? Okay? It's a great story. And I got to tell you, it's very flattering in some ways. And I guess I get X amount of flattery as an author, and most of it kind of doesn't mean a whole hell of a lot to me. I mean, I appreciate it, but I'm saying I don't write I'm not the type of person that really likes to be flattered. But I thought it very flattering that Radu wrote to me and told me that Cesar liked what was in some of my books. So he'd obviously read them, and it's very flattering to know these people know who the hell you are. They even know of you. This becomes a little more evident in book 2, which I've only read a part of. And I still have to translate it from Euro-English and broken Romanian English into our English. That's what I have to do when I get back. It's my, one of my main priorities. So anyway, this is very interesting. Now, I got to check my time again so that I don't... Okay, 12 minutes. It's not a lot of time. Okay, well, we can follow up on some of it tomorrow morning. I don't know what time I'm speaking tomorrow. I think it's 10:30, but I'm not sure. Might be 10. Does anybody know? Okay. Anyway, so... 10:15, okay. Yes, Virginia.
Peter, may I say that I read that book, and
Right.
it is one of the most fantastic, interesting, entertaining books I have ever read. I picked it up and I could do nothing but read the book to the end.
Well, that is a testament to your awareness as well, because there's some people that would read it and say, I don't like the way it's written. I like the way you write better, because this is not written by me. I write the beginning and I write 2 epilogues. And people would say, well, I don't like it. The guy is telling a story, and it's his story. And he even explains why he wrote it the way he wrote it. So if some people have a penchant for reading the way I write, they're identifying with me. This is not me. This is Radu. And I'm helping translate it. But I appreciate that, because it's not about me. It's what he says, and he says it pretty concisely. You know, he doesn't claim to be a great writer. But he's certainly an adequate writer, and sometimes he's very good. He's got a very good command of the English language. I appreciate that, but I'm saying some people have not given me such a nice statement. But I agree with you. It's a gripping book.
If you don't afford yourself the opportunity and pleasure of reading that book, I think you're really selling yourself for it.
Okay,
So much.
make the question quick because I want to get to what punchline I can deliver. Go ahead.
Okay, you were talking about, say, the holographic projections that were
Right.
developed in some of the technology. How far back did it go when it was projecting, say, the geological history of the earth changes and everything like that? Did they go
Actually, I don't remember how far. I think it goes back to, you know,
Does
your.
it only go back to the time when that technology was imposed there, or does it go back earlier during the great tectonic plate shift?
It goes into some of that as is relevant to what he's trying to get across. He does say it cuts off in about 400, 500 AD, and there's no more after that. And yeah, he says they attribute that to needing a software update. But they don't know. They don't know. And now, this book was written when the thing had only been investigated 6 weeks. It's now been investigated for 7 years. This was in August 2003, which coincides with the August 12th biorhythm of Montauk and Philadelphia experiments.
Well, the one thing I don't know if you really touched upon it here, when they initially were trying to find out exactly what the phenomena was, two people found out it was a Stargate because they absolutely disappeared off the face of the earth.
That was not necessarily this same location.
Oh, it wasn't?
No, there were many, those were the sort of things Department Zero investigates. I thought it was too. There was the yellow chain, but the yellow chain is a different location. It's not this location.
So, in other words, when they blew up that one spot trying to figure out how to get into the mountain, that wasn't necessarily attached to the chamber?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Now, there's some more aspects of what's happened in this area since that we can go into tomorrow. But what I want to say that's fascinating is Book 2 starts off with a Tibetan Lama reading this book in the Romanian language or finding out about it, and he makes contact through a man named Eleanor, who's an alchemist, who's comes from a tradition where people live hundreds of years, sort of like Saint Germain. Two mysterious characters. And Eleanor contacts my publisher, Sorin, and doggedly persists he wants to speak to Radu. And this goes on because Radu is not available. Sorin has to use a specially prepaid phone card to call him. He's very mysterious. He almost came to my house the summer before last and said he stopped at the last minute because he didn't want to give me problems, because there's a lot of Men in Black type phenomena that might follow him. And I'm not saying they're Men in Black, but that type of phenomena. So, yeah, so anyway, the Lama who contacts Radu and does contact him, because it's explained and meets him in the second book, is Dr. Zen, who's really a Tibetan Lama who was posing as a doctor in Red China. He's got a lot of contacts in China. So he's a very, evolved Lama who leaves in 1956 before the Dalai Lama has to run for his life. And he's a big, important man in Lhasa, but he's not a follower of the Dalai Lama. He's much more evolved than the CIA contrived Dalai Lama is, who's was on the payroll of the CIA. So the best thing about the Dalai Lama, though, is his laugh. He's got a wonderful laugh, very forced, and very worth listening to and imitating. But Lama, the Lama is, they ends up meeting with Radu in a villa in Bucharest, which is owned by Eleanor, who, when Radu gets there, he has to wait 2 hours, so they have a long discussion, and he tells him about an alchemical device that he made, that he got a letter from one of his ancestors, passed down hundreds of years, and he was like this whole family where they train down these alchemical traditions. They'd find somebody worthy in your gene pool, and then they would give them money and give them what they call the great work. And he created a geometrical device. It's an incredible device with a crystal in the middle that supposedly prolongs his life. He'll live hundreds and hundreds of years as long as his vital organs don't get compromised in an accident or something. So this is a separate tradition than the lamas. They know each other. But it's like you might say, one's a classical musician and the other one is a folk rock person. They're different traditions, but they both play the music. So they meet with Radu, and they take him to Transylvania, not far from where I was, not too far. And the best part of it is there's a creature who appears with them, with the lama, and he's a giant man. He's about close to 7 feet, and he's called a yidam. And a yidam is something that you, in Tibetan tradition, you create at a very high level of evolution when you can no longer evolve past a certain point, and you need to penetrate dimensions, and you do a sand mandala. This is the meaning of the sand mandala. That's the secret meaning of the sand mandala. It's done, and you create a yidam, which is a creature. This guy's a big, imposing character. It could be a Sasquatch. It could be a beautiful girl. It could be an ugly witch. Okay? It's what you create. It's an extension of yourself. And this yidam comes into play. He looks totally fierce. He's a physical entity, but he can disappear and become unphysical and go to other worlds, which is consistent with some descriptions of Sasquatch I've been given. But the yidam accompanies them to Transylvania. Well, he doesn't accompany them. He shows up when they get there, and he creates a change in the environment, which sounds like a hallucinogenic. And it's a whole change. And Radu is having an incredible initiation. The book that they wrote in Romanian is 12 Days, A Secret Initiation in the Mysterious Land of the Gods. And he's taken to Tibet, where they go into a cave, and the yidam is there to make all this stuff happen. And he goes into a cave where Eleanor and the lama and the yidam do not go any further. And I think something happens. He transforms into this incredible world where I think it becomes different. Like we talk about the inner earth, and we talked a lot about the physics of the inner earth, or Rick and Dennis did. But I think something changes in the scape. And he meets an incredible goddess named Mashande. And she is blue. Okay? Now, he's not right saying she's blue because he's reading my books. It's because she appears blue, and she's incredibly well-proportioned and perfect. And she begins to educate him. And she educates him in that he has a task to do. She gives him a manuscript. And the manuscript is book 4. Book 3, and I haven't read book 3 or book 4. I'm almost done with book 2. And book 3 is about these time travel adventures I think Cesar has, and Radu goes to work for Department Zero. He's not working for them yet. And now he is working for them right now, and I get letters, oh, things are very busy here. I'm not allowed to write any more books if I want to keep my life. But he just recently wrote me, Cesar is going to come back into my life and things are going to get better. He knows this. This was predicted. His other mentor, the general, is now passed away. And so anyway, book 4 is I think called the Secret Parchment. And this is a parchment that Mashandi gives him. I think it's a tantric parchment, and Dr. Zen, or the Lama, is the one who translates it. He has to translate it because he can read this ancient script. So what he says is that she's saying is that time is very critical on this earth. And people aren't getting it. And she's releasing this information. So here again, I'm saying is I'm becoming a vehicle for telling this story that's coming right out of the center of the earth, of this blue goddess, Mashande. And she's like, wow, I've been writing about the blue goddess. If you see my Montauk Book of the Living, you'll see this blue goddess on it. She's from the inner parts of Algeria, Sahara, Queen Antenea, where the name Athena comes from, goddess of wisdom. Mashandi is another version of wisdom, So I'm saying this is an active process that this is very exciting stuff I'm telling you, and it's so exciting you're not going to hear about it on the television. And Mary has been a great supporter of mine. You hear about it at the Sci-Fi Cafe. And David has even, I told him I was coming here. He says, well, maybe he could come here via hookup, televideo. So I'm going to try and arrange that, you know, in a future reference so you can see David speak. And maybe, I don't know if we'll be able to entertain questions or not. I would imagine we would.